Welcome back everyone to Final Fantasy IX Translation Analysis. In this video series that now spans over 10 episodes, I compare Final Fantasy IX's English translation to the original Japanese script and comment on the most interesting differences between the two. Episode 11 marks the start of Disc 3, which has a pretty hectic and eventful beginning, where Zidane quotes some proverbs and Kuja recites some poetry. So let's take a look at those and much more, shall we? In the beginning of Disc 3, we got a glimpse of Amarant's past. In it, Zidane tells Amarant, "The sly eagle hides its claws." This is a famous Japanese proverb, although in Japanese they name a different bird of prey. No aru taka wa tsume o kakusu. A skilled hawk hides its talons. But the English localization actually did a pretty neat thing here, since this is actually the second time that we see Zidane say an eagle-based aphorism to Amarant in English. Earlier, after they fought in Madain Sari, and Amarant was bothered that Zidane refused to finish him off, Zidane told him, "The sly eagle doesn't kill at a whim." In Japanese, Zidane doesn't specify an eagle or a hawk there. First, Salamander accuses him of having no fangs, which is a Japanese way of saying that he's spineless and lacks the bite to match his bark. In response, Zidane says that wild animals with fangs don't kill in vain, but in English the translator specifies an eagle, which creates a neat continuity with the Treno line that we see now. One of Kuja's most famous moments and lines is the poem he recites in Alexandria before summoning Bahamut to attack it. They even had him recite it again in the original The City of Final Fantasy. In English, the poem goes like this: "Peace is but a shadow of death, desperate to forget its painful past. Though we hope for promising years, after shedding 1,000 tears, yesterday's sorrow constantly nears. And while the moon still shines blue, by dawn it will turn to scarlet hue." This is a very liberal translation, which is understandable to an extent, since poetry is naturally much more difficult to translate than prose. For starters, in Japanese, Kuja makes no attempt to rhyme, which isn't surprising since rhyming isn't all that popular in Japan actually, be it in poetry or song, what with the language having only 46 possible syllables that all end in one of 5 vowel sounds, and the verb always comes at the end of the sentence, so they often rhyme without even trying, and rhymes just don't have the allure or appeal that they do in other languages. Anyway, here's how Kuja's poem goes in Japanese. And to spare you another poor attempt of mine at reciting poetry, I'll let Akira Ishida do the honors here.
明日の幸せを願って人は眠る。昨日の不幸をすべて忘れてしまうために。そして、喜びに満ちた夢を見ることを願う。そう。辛く苦しい現実を忘れてしまいたいから。
So, here's one way we might translate this. People wish for a happier tomorrow as they fall to sleep, so that they might forget the sorrows of yesterday, and they wish for dreams filled with joy, so that they might forget the bitter pain of reality. So, as you can see, the last 2 lines about the moon in English were completely made up, but more importantly, in Japanese, he's describing the present state of Alexandria and its people in a much more concrete and less metaphorical manner, to the point that it barely even feels like a poem in Japanese. The English translators really went the extra mile here, and I must say I rather enjoy it, as the English poem still fits Kuja's character and the situation quite well, and makes this scene feel even more foreboding. On the other hand, Kuja's subsequent lines, where he's clearly no longer composing poetry, actually sound much more poetic in Japanese. In English he says, "What an auspicious day for Alexandria. Garnet's ascension to the throne has brought hope and peace to this kingdom. The people are overjoyed. They believe a wonderful future is ahead of them, but the celebration isn't over yet. It's time to really light things up." Now let's compare that with a more faithful translation of his Japanese lines. "It's so quiet, just like any other night. After celebrating the birth of a new queen, Alexandria seems worn out with rapture. The wine of bliss washes away the sorrow of a painful past and brings forth a rosy future in its stead, so the people believe. But the party isn't over yet. In fact, the real party starts now. So let us begin. Let us scorch Alexandria with the flames of delight." So you see, even though in English they really structured and translated Kuja's opening lines in this scene like a full-blown poem, as I alluded to in the previous episode, in his regular dialogue, Kuja's lines actually tend to have more of a poetic and theatrical flair in Japanese. Speaking of sounding poetic, remember when I talked about Zidane's more sensitive and poetic side in Japanese way back in episode 3? Well, it kind of rears its head again in this section, when Zidane tells the rest of the party that he'll go alone to save Garnet. There's a lot of differences here, right from the start. In English, he begins with, "There's no point in all of us going, I'll take it from here." In Japanese, he says he'll go alone as well, but he specifically tells the other party members to go save the people of Alexandria while he saves Garnet, which I appreciate. But his following lines, after Vivi asks him why he's doing this, are where the differences really become striking. In English, his speech goes like this: "Kuja might destroy this castle at any minute. Get out of here while you can. Go on, Vivi, don't worry about me. Someday, you'll probably do the same thing for someone who's really important to you. Dagger is more important to me than anything else." In Japanese, he says, "今の俺の頭の中はダガのことでいっぱいで、ダガのことだけで他のことは考えられなくて、そんな俺が皆を守るなんて自信がないんだ." My head is filled to the brim with thoughts of Dagger. She's all I can think about right now, and I don't think I can protect anyone else in this state. As you can see, they pretty much rewrote his entire speech there, but his last lines in this scene are even more strikingly different, in a way that once again demonstrates what I mentioned before, that, for better or worse, the English vocalization has a tendency to play down Zidane's more sensitive side and his penchant for waxing poetic when feeling emotional. Here's what he says to Vivi in English, when the latter still wants to accompany him. "Sorry I can't take you with me, but I have to go with my instincts on this one. I don't know what else to say." Well, you could say what you said in Japanese, where you had a lot more to say. But maybe the translators thought those lines wouldn't really work in English, which I could actually understand, to be honest. Anyway, here they are. "Vivi, わかってくれ。人を助けるのに理由が必要か？人が生きるのに理屈が必要か？そんなもの必要ないだろ？今の俺はそういう気持ちなんだよ." We could translate this as, "Vivi, please understand. Do we need a reason to help people? Do people need to justify their desire to live? Of course not, right? Well, that's how I feel right now." So yeah, while it is neat that Zidane almost reiterates the quote from his title card, which in Japanese is indeed phrased as a question, "Dareka o tasukeru no ni riyū ga iru kai?" Do I need a reason to help someone? Nevertheless, I would say this speech feels a bit too abstract and overwrought for this particular occasion, so I can understand the translator simplifying it into something that might sound more natural and less awkward in English. However, later on there will be an occasion where Zidane actually says the exact line from his title card, but it still won't make it to the English script, and I'll have a lot to say about that when we get there. Now let's skip ahead to our second visit to the Black Mage Village, where Vivi has arguably his best moment in his speech to number 288. Overall, that speech is very well translated into English, but I do feel there's one line that packed more of a punch in Japanese. It's after Vivi says he realized that he was quite capable of feeling sorrow and empathy after seeing Dagger grieve over the death of her mother. In English, he concludes that, "If I were just a puppet, I never would have felt that way." Mr. 288, we aren't puppets. I know we aren't. Just so you know, in Japanese, rather than puppet, Vivi uses the term hitogoroshi no dogu, meaning tool or instrument of murder. Anyway, here's how those lines go in Japanese. でもそう思ったのは僕が人殺しの道具じゃないからだよね。なんだか難しいことをいっぱいでよくわかんないことだらだけだけど、僕それがわかったからいいんだ。This can be roughly translated as, "The reason I was able to feel that way is because I'm not a tool of murder. There's still a lot of things I don't understand, but as long as I know that, I'll be alright." Personally, I really love this part of his speech. After all, the scene is sort of the climax of Vivi's character arc. Obviously, he still has some touching moments coming up, but this is the moment where he finds his answer and resolve. It's a complex and incomplete answer, of course. How could it be otherwise when the problem he's facing is his own impending mortality? But that's what makes this moment so poignant. He still has no answers to the questions he asked back in Madain Sari. What does it mean to live and to die? Where do we come from? Do we go back there when we die? Where will I end up when I die? And probably, why do we have to die? Again, he still doesn't understand those things, but now he has something that can give him the strength to live in spite of all those doubts and fears. He knows he's not a tool of murder. He knows his existence isn't inherently bad or wrong. He knows he can follow his own free will and lead a meaningful life. And as long as he knows that, even if he's not meant to last, he'll be alright. Well, that's enough for today. Next time, the party heads off to Kuja's secret lair and travels all the way to his home planet. That's right, we'll be covering a lot of ground and going over a lot of references to previous Final Fantasies that were lost in translation. So look forward to that, and in the meantime, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next time, Chocobros.